Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're
Thank you.
speaking with Kiera Kehoe, brand manager at Smash Kitchen, the organic condiments and cooking oils brand co-founded by actor Glenn Powell, who seems to be everywhere these days. Kiera spent a few years honing her brand management chops at brands like Zach's Almighty and a number of other ones, and also built a demo and merchandising agency along the way that covered, I think, 40-ish states or so. So that's a lot of fun directions we can kind of take this. Excited to dive in. I think as a former founder of a pretty sizable demo agency, definitely want to spend kind of a bulk of our time here, just because I think, especially brands are scaling, demos can have such a big impact. First question, what gap did you see that made you want to start lift off demos in the first place?
Yeah, so I didn't really see a gap because there's so many agencies out there. I think the biggest thing I saw was at my previous company, Zach's Mighty, we built out a demo field team. So we had a lot of our, people in-house as part of our team. And I saw the difference between, having your own people versus having an agency and just, when you're investing in them and all of that. But I know every brand doesn't have that, ability. And so, as Zach's grew, we kind of winded down, very much like other brands, when we initially launched, demos were a big part of our strategy for a few years. And then, the goal, right, is to grow and then pull back on some of those spends. And so I had this awesome team, and I also knew that there is a demand, for great demos. At Zach's, I was lucky. We were working with some salsa brands because we were a tortilla chip company. And so I had some awesome, connections that we had worked with, and we would say, hey, if you guys kind of want to split the cost of demos, our BA's brand ambassador can sample both. And so I was already in the cadence of working with other brands and having our ambassadors, work across multiple brands, and obviously would give them reports and everything. And we had one brand who actually was like, you guys have sold better than any other agency. And so it was a very like organic, decision because we were winding down our, program at Zach's, and I had some of these brands who were saying, what are you guys doing? Are you doing more? And so I started, connecting them with our team. Then I was like, all right, I have something here. And so, Liftoff was born and, started working with a few clients and, all natural channel, Whole Foods, Sprouts. And it was great. I am so passionate about demos. I love it. I love, the people. I love having brands have that same, experience that I did where you're like, okay, I spent money and I move units, like this is something that I'm seeing, impact from a spend, at the store level. And so yeah, that's how it all started.
Makes sense. What is a successful demo in your mind actually accomplish beyond just selling a few more units than usual that day versus when someone's not doing a demo? Like, I think there's a lot of other value that adds beyond that long term.
Totally. So there's so much that you can get from just someone going to the store doing a demo. You get shelf photos, you get amazing feedback. That's always the biggest thing. That's always, if I'm onboarding someone or training someone new, I'm like, feedback is so important, especially for small brands. I'm like, we read every line, we read every detail. And so all of my team's reports are always like very much in depth, and it's amazing because you get, direct quotes from shoppers at these stores. And so, yeah, I'd say, shelf photos, feedback, a great photo of the setup that you can bring to your next retailer meeting and say, hey, look how we're supporting you. This is how much, we're investing in you. This is what we're bringing to your stores. All of those are, you know, really important.
What would you say is the biggest misconception people may have about the world of demos?
I would say the biggest misconception is that, it's hard to track return on investment because, can always figure out a way to track store sales. And I would say, a lot of times it is a big marketing expense. It's, when you invest in demos, you have to invest pretty heavily because if you just do a few, you're not really going to move the needle unless it's like a, really, really small chain. And so you do have to like lean in and invest. And so I think, from what I just said, all those things that you get out of it. And something I forgot was also the relationship that brand ambassadors are able to build with stores and store managers. It's a very worthwhile investment. I think it's hard to stomach because it's a lot and you have to do it and do it right, but I think
Yeah.
it's very worthwhile.
What would you say is the biggest demo strategy mistake first time founders make?
I think none of the you know brands that I worked with really did this, but I know a lot of I'm speaking from with ambassadors. I know kind of what they've been, what they've dealt with other brands. Sometimes brands will say, I only want demos on this day, at this time. It has to be a weekend. It has to be at this time. I always say, let the ambassador tell you. They are in these stores all the time for the most part, unless, they're new to the world and you're training them. That's kind of different. But a lot of, the people that I've hired, they've done this for a while and they have such good insight. I always say, listen to the ambassadors. They'll tell you.
Totally.
And they'll even, and I think other times, you'll give a store list to an agency, right? Like, these are the stores I want to hit, only these ones. And you'll have ambassadors say, "Hey, I'll go to this, but it's dead." Yeah, or, like, "I'd much rather go to this one," or, "The clientele at this one never buys. Like, let's go to this one." So I'd say, lean on them as much as you can because they have so much insight. They're the ones there and they can teach you a lot. And I think a lot of times, like, they don't even get asked. Like,
I know, it's
I'm
crazy.
like,
It's crazy that
you
they don't
tell
get.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, "You tell me what's going on, you tell
Yeah.
me," and they have so much insight, so it's worth talking to them and having them guide your strategy a little bit.
Totally. In terms of kind of like when demos make sense and versus maybe when they don't make sense, from your kind of experience, what stage should a brand start doing demos? Like, when is it too early? I guess is maybe another way to put it.
Yeah, I think, it should be a part of your initial strategy the first 1 to 2 years of launching. I think too early, I always think, you need to let a product get to shelf. You need to make sure it's on shelf. You need to, give it a second to breathe, get kind of your initial, 1 to 2 to 3 months of data, what stores are doing well, where are we doing well, figure out kind of, your understand your product a little bit and then start investing in demos and whether you want to pump a region or you're pleasantly surprised the region is doing well and you want to support it even more and see how much more it can do. I think within the first 3 to 4 months, I think it's good to have a demo strategy in place. Because again, right off the bat, you're getting learnings, you're getting boots on the ground, you're getting pictures of your product in stores. You have brand ambassadors. It's not always the best text in the world, but they're like, "Hey, this store hasn't ordered in 2 weeks," or "Hey, we're on the bottom shelf here," but it's insights that you can take action on pretty quickly.
Yeah, totally. I'm not sure how many brands you worked with at Liftoff, but are there any categories that you found where demos are be like almost mandatory versus not?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. One interesting thing is that most ambassadors that I've worked with over the years all at some point have done liquor. So it seems like that category, I've never worked with a liquor brand or on a liquor brand, but it seems like that category is a must. So I'm like, if that is ever in my future, I feel like it's just crazy. Every resume I get, it's a liquor brand. So I'd say that category for sure. It seems like when
Yes.
it comes to demoing, I think it's difficult when you have an item that is really low price. So, a granola bar or a drink, it's nearly impossible to ever see a return on that.
Yeah.
And so that's hard. If it's a higher priced item, you can see you can generate a return per demo. But
Yeah.
I think the categories that do best, it's kind of, reverse of that are kind of the impulse items that aren't that expensive that, people try and you're like, "Hey, it's only 4.99 and they don't really have to think too hard about it. Whereas, some of the higher price stuff, it's a little bit harder, but then again, you don't have to sell as much to make up for it. So, I think ambassadors definitely enjoy more of the impulse buy type brands,
Yeah.
a snack, a beverage. you know.
how do you think about, or how did you, I'm not sure if you worked with any brands that, on the shelf table is the wrong word, but products that were in the frozen aisle as an example, or things that needed to be, heated up. I feel like that's probably significantly more challenging. Did you work with any brands that are in those categories?
Yeah, I worked with one brand. They wanted to do tater tots, and there was hesitation at first with the brand ambassador team. They were like, "This is going to affect, where we're going to be put up in the stores, and if there's on an outlet." And I was like, "Let's try it," and it went really well. We sent everyone an air fryer. And they were like, "Oh, people actually want to come to the table. They kind of smell it. They
Yeah, good point.
the outlet situation was good. And so that's the only cooking, demo that I've done. But, I think it's always tough when you have to like ask more of the ambassadors. And I know, it's throws them off a little bit, but that
Yeah.
one went well. But I've never done, I know some of my team has done demos for like rice brands and stuff, some of like the packaged rice. And so they have like slow cookers and they're, they do it, they'll go to the back room and heat stuff up and bring it out and they have a heater on the table. So,
Yeah,
they make it work. And kids like it too, so if you
exactly.
get a kid over to the table and they like it, then the parent kind of has to buy it. So
Totally.
it does work.
Especially in like the early stages of a brand, how do you recommend to like a founder, how do they think about their marketing budget when it comes to allocating budget to demos in the early days versus other things?
Yeah. So I always say, and I don't know if this is right by any means, but I always say you kind of have two marketing buckets, and one of them has to be getting people to like your product and one of them has to be getting people to like your brand. And so I look at, the meta and social and content creation and, experiential and out of home stuff as that, getting people to buy into your brand and get to know you. And then, getting people to buy your product is kind of where demos would fall. So
Yeah,
in terms of that, I would rank demos second. I would say first bucket should be online sponsored search like Instacart,
sure.
you know, Walmart Connect, all of those, because that's going to be, you get great returns. You have to be on there. You have to be visible. And then I would say demo secondary. That's how I, have built that, getting people to buy your shopper marketing budget, you call it.
Yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, I always struggle ranking, that with, the brand marketing because they're so
Yeah,
different.
yeah, for sure. As a brand starts to scale into more doors, but they're still in those earlier stages where budgets are still, pretty tight.
Mhm.
How do you choose in terms of directing the brand ambassadors which stores to prioritize or demo at first? Maybe it's just as simple as, store sales, like this one sells the most units, so maybe it can boost the most, or maybe it's the ones that are the slowest moving. Yeah, how do you kind of think about prioritizing?
Yeah, I think if you're working on a small budget, you go to the stores that are the best for you because you're going to move even more product. The reps probably know those stores and like those stores, and you also know that they probably have inventory for you. So I would start there because I think there's always more you can pump out of good stores.
What does a successful demo look like to you? Not like numbers wise.
Yeah, so setups are so important, and that's something it's fun, like it's funny. It's different, for every ambassador. It's something that we drill so hard in training and we're like the setup is so important and, pictures on pictures of this is what the setup should look like. And some ambassadors are just like naturally their table is beautiful and they bring a plant from home and have it on the table and they thought to bring a garbage can to have next to the table and they just have it down. It's like just some people are just like that, like their room is always perfect and others will send a picture of their table, they're like, how does it look? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like not great, let's reorganize. So in um whenever they start and I've kind of learned some tricks along the way when it comes to, there's like some stands on Amazon that putting the product on just automatically makes the table look better. The tablecloth, having branding on the tablecloth is great. And, sometimes I see pictures, I'm like, hey, go get it ironed. We'll cover it. Because that stuff is just important. Getting people to the table. So that's something that is you never know what you're gonna get. But we always need a picture, especially if someone's starting, that day or that week. I'm like, when you get to the store, send me a picture of the setup. Let's make sure it's okay before beginning. And then when it comes to reporting, obviously extremely important. Whether we're doing it in house or an agency. And so I've used a software called Piñata for years now, and used it in house, used it as an agency. Brand ambassadors have to check in to the location so I can see they're checked in. I can see when they check out. It tracks their location. And then you get to tailor the report. So, you get samples distributed, you get shelf photos, you get all of that feedback, of course. I love when I see like a paragraph of feedback. I'm like, amazing.
Totally.
And yeah, I give, ambassadors, I always say, within 2 to 3 days, have it done because you're going to forget. But a lot of them take notes and stuff.
From a metrics reporting ROI standpoint, what metrics matter most during a demo?
Yeah, I'd say, I always track samples distributed and sales. And then in terms of kind of longer term, if a rep in the feedback says, hey, we sold out, the store ordered up, like confirmation, store reordered, or, every now and then you get, hey, told the store that I'm going to come back and we got an end cap. And so I think one of the long-term benefits for sure is that once you are in these stores, a handful of times, they're going to start ordering for you. And that to me is a huge long term benefit. They know you're coming back. And most ambassadors are like, hey, I'm going to come back, this day, that's next week. Make sure you have this. And they order it because they know that they're going to sell it.
Any examples of a brand that you've worked with where you saw the payoff over time? The metrics don't necessarily indicate that day of demo haven't had a huge impact from like units sold or samples given out or something, but you start to see it over time. It just kind of adds up.
Yeah, it's something that you see over time, and it comes from, again, being in the stores pretty frequently. It's hard to do like a one-off. I mean, a one-off, you'll most of the time see a bump, but then it's going to go back down. And so it takes about a year, so like 2 years to really, at the 2 year point, a lot of times the ambassadors are like, all these shoppers know me, and it's great. And, that way, as you're innovating and launching new stuff, they know that they know you, they like it. They're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna, what do you have today? I'm gonna grab it. But yeah, we definitely saw, with Whole Foods specifically, like the stores that we were at, pretty long term. Those were some of our top stores,
That's
even when
great.
we pulled back, because you're forming those relationships with the shoppers. And so, over time it clicks, and it's an inventory thing too. Stores will give you that extra facing because they're ordering up.
Yep, totally. What makes a great demo rep brand ambassador?
Someone who cares. And there are so many people who do, and there's some people who don't, but that's probably my favorite part of working in the field marketing demo world. There are so many people, ambassadors who care so much and go the extra mile, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I found, something expired, or the store hasn't ordered up. I'm going back tomorrow." And, they want to succeed just as badly as you do. It's like the best feeling, because it's similar to being on a team where you're like, we're all in this together.
Totally.
That's what makes a great ambassador. You can always fix the table, you could always fix the little things, but that enthusiasm obviously shows when they're selling the product. They feel like they're a part of it, and they are. So yeah, just, I think I would say number one is enthusiasm. And that's, I've worked with so many people over the years where I'm like so shocked that how driven they are to sell, and how, I've had ambassadors being like, oh my gosh, like, this store manager hasn't ordered up. I've called him every day this week. I'm like, and they're not getting paid to do that, but they just care.
Yeah. Are there ways you can motivate and or the way you incentivize brand ambassadors to actually truly care about the brand, or is it just kind of innate? Either they just come in really caring a lot or they don't.
I think, some do. Some who have a background with other brands, they are, they like being in this world and they're excited about a new product, so it just like snaps initially. Others, what I've always done building like in-house field teams is have, a group chat with everyone, and it's it's so fun like hearing, having people send updates and what's working, what's not, and hey, I tried this today, it worked, or I'm trying a new store today. And so that I think it's really just making people feel, a part of something, and they are, they're boots on the ground for you. And so I think, telling them, hey, I have some reps. I'm like, hey, your stores are the number one, in this state, like, and they're like, oh my gosh, sorry, like I had no idea. So I think, and that goes for any job in any industry. Like, if you have people working for you, I think telling them, this is why we're doing this, and here's the impact you're having, it creates motivation.
Totally. What's the best place or strategy to find the best brand ambassadors? And we just where to find, yeah, or where to find them.
Yeah. So initially, when we were building a team, we had a field marketing manager like years ago. He brought in a few people who he had worked with, and from there, it was kind of this like network that blew up. It's very much a network, and a lot of people I've hired over the years are recommendations. Sometimes I'm working with one, woman in Miami, and she's like, "Oh, I met this great rep yesterday at Fresh Market doing a demo next to me. I got her information." Like it seriously works like that. And so I always love hiring from recommendations. That's how I try to do, you know, like 75% of my hiring. And then other than that, Facebook groups. That's,
Thing.
yeah, there's one
Like,
for,
they're like brand ambassador demo Facebook groups, or are you ones
yeah,
you kind of go in Facebook groups that are other groups that you feel like those type of people would be good brand ambassadors?
there's just groups for, different cities, different states,
Okay.
and depending if I'm like, "Oh, I need someone in this market," I'll join those and post, and then you get people reaching out, and yeah, that's how it goes. That's how I've always
Makes
done it.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's consider a brand. They're early, but they're starting to hit the snowball is starting to roll fast and faster down the hill. Maybe it's just been, just say it's like three co-founders that started the brand. It's just basically been them doing the demos and maybe tagging in their friends or, wives or something here and there. Budgets are getting bigger, but, still somewhat limited. Why does it make sense to hire an agency like Liftoff, or I don't know, when and why does it make sense to build out an internal demo team?
Yeah, I think an agency is early on, you kind of just, if it is, a found or just the co-founders or, 2 to 3 to 4 employees, that's the way to go. Like I said earlier, it's hard to find really good agencies, but that's kind of the way to step into it. And especially if a brand has been doing demos themselves, which I always think is a great thing because they're on the ground and hearing what customers are saying, then they can really train and manage the agency closely, and they know what's worked for them, and they can really direct them. So, it takes a lot off when an agency is handling, the scheduling, the payments, the staffing, all of that.
Yeah,
But, always make sure that you're getting on a training call, you're monitoring, that they know that you're watching sales. And so I think, for the first few months to a year, if you have really limited resources, it's the way to go. And it's just about management, and you kind of find the people within the agencies that are doing a really good job for you and ask them to do more demos. And then, yeah, I think, it's kind of a natural thing. If it's something that's working for you, then that's when you take it internally because there's been proof of concept. Some brands, it just might not work. And so it's,
yeah,
good to have that test before you are hiring people.
totally. Yeah, it makes sense. For the brands that do hire an agency, what's the most effective way to diligence these types of demo agencies in terms of quality of reps, reporting, channel capabilities, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think understanding kind of upfront what their reporting looks like. I think asking the agency, what are your strongest regions? Where are your strongest people? They'll tell you. And I that's the way that I've always done it. Kind of said, you tell me where are your best people? Let's start there. and then kind of go from there, or just say, hey, where did you start? Like, what were your first few regions? Those typically are some of their strongest.
On the agency side, how many brands is too many for one brand ambassador to be, repping before they can't really care about any of them because there's just too many?
Hmm. I know, I know that a lot of ambassadors enjoy working with different brands because they like switching it up and,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe like 10 to 12.
Okay.
I don't know. I would say just because it might lead to like burnout.
What's the most common ways that demos can go wrong, and how do you plan ahead?
I think the biggest thing is inventory, especially when you're starting off. And, it's a pain to do, but you have to call the stores. You have to, 3 days before, 2 days before, 3 days before, call them, hey, order up. 2 days before, call them, hey, remember me? Like, we're coming in.
Yeah.
And then eventually that is not an issue because, you're there and they know you and okay, we're gonna, you see them face to face. Hey, order up, I'm coming. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. It's, sometimes a store is like, hey, yeah, sure, I'm gonna order up, and then you show up and there's only 3 or 4 units on the shelf, and
Right.
the brand ambassador has gone there and started to set up, and so that's uh always a bummer.
Yeah. What does your playbook look like, or how you recommend to brand ambassadors how to kind of deal with situations where they get, when they just get to a store and whatever reason they're just super disengaged, not really helpful, and or maybe even, hopefully doesn't happen too frequently, but ones that are actually somewhat openly hostile to the brand ambassadors in terms of not being supportive and in terms of them doing demos.
Yeah, I don't think I've really had that
Okay, that's good.
experience. I think, yeah, most store managers, shout out to store managers. I feel like most of them are always like excited to have someone there. If anything, maybe they're annoyed at how much we call ahead sometimes to make sure they have product. But no, I think like pretty lucky that we haven't really had that happen.
That's great.
With more natural channel chains or retailers, you kind of know that a certain percent of stores are going to do a bulkier business. It's kind of easier to pick those stores out and focus on those. Whereas, bigger, it's so hard to know. It's like, you know, Texas has as many Walmarts as, like there are like Whole Foods almost, like it's crazy. And so I think it's just harder to figure out kind of where to go and how to target stores.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. What's the most common objections that like brand ambassadors get from consumers, and how do you train them to rebut them or answer them or deal with those objections?
Yeah, it totally varies by product and it's so interesting. And, it's like there's always one ingredient that all of a sudden, it's like I feel like I get exposure to the trends before I see them sometimes like in the headlines and stuff because people are like, oh, all of a sudden people are avoiding this or they heard about this. And so it totally varies by product. And a lot of times, I'll ask brands like, do you have a 1 or 2 pager on why and how we can explain? And then, price is always is something, more so at, some of the natural channel stores. It can be a barrier, but I'd say, there's ingredients and now, with there's so many apps that people are like, hey, it's scanning on this app and I don't know why it's showing as a bad score. And I had 5 people use this app today. And so I'd say, making sure you kind of know where your products stand on those apps is important.
How can a brand most effectively scale national demo strategy?
Yeah, it gets harder the bigger you scale for sure, but I think it's what you said, kind of a mix of agencies, and I do think a lot of agencies are regional, and so it's kind
Yeah.
of finding those and working with those. So sometimes your in-house team covers an X amount, and we don't have anyone in these newer regions that we're in, and so definitely a mix of more of the regional agencies.
Where do demo programs most commonly break as they scale?
I think You know, I think after that, like, 2-year mark, you kinda know, where you stand as a brand. A lot of, your reps have established probably really strong, base level store sales. most brands at that point have expanded nationally, or entering more conventional, and I think the spend is just too hard to keep up with. It's just the
Sure.
reality.
Yeah.
And so, that's when you switch more into some of the online stuff or more of the mass media stuff. Yeah, I think that's when it kind of has to end.
You mentioned Piñata. Other than that one, any other kind of core tools that you found are super useful in terms of scaling up a demo agency or program to a pretty large scale?
Yeah, so I use Piñata for all reporting. And then when I had an agency, I used Gusto for payroll. Really, really easy. I think those are the only two
Cool.
really
It's
like
easy.
softwares that I use. And then, I'm lucky. I've had so many great ambassadors who have, stepped up and helped me, like Florida specifically, have some great, team members down there. And I'm
Nice.
like, hey, I'm onboarding this new person. Can you just help them out? Or, so I think kind of raising up some of your top people, or you kind of know the people who you can kind of be like, hey, do you mind? Can I give you a few more hours? Will you help me out with
Yeah.
this? Or will you help this person out? And so, it's really hard, obviously, when it's your team or your company. But I've definitely learned like leaning on, people who are doing the work and are willing to do more is really beneficial.
Looking into the future a bit, you've been in this demo world for, quite a while now, you know it pretty well. Uh, Based on what you've seen, I'm not sure if things have changed, dramatically over the past few years, but any just based on what you know, any notable changes you think we might see in the general kind of demo landscape over the next, I don't know, 5, 7 years or so? Or do you think things are going to pretty much kind of remain the same?
That's a good question. I feel like we're going to see more demos. I feel like I'm seeing more and more brands investing in it. I know like Fishwife always talks about, how it's been such a big part of their marketing strategy. And I think also a lot of like co-demos, I think cutting costs, that's what we did at Dax Mighty, kind of, splitting the table and collaborating. I think it's, you still get sales and you're able to kind of pull back on costs a little bit. But
Yeah, makes
yeah,
sense.
I think a lot of brands are using it and seeing the benefits of it, so maybe more demos.
If people are curious about learning more about demos, I'm not sure if you want to get bugged, but what's the best place for people to follow along with you and everything you're working on at Smash Kitchen and everything else you're
Yeah,
working on?
connect with me on LinkedIn, Kiera Kehoe, and I'll
Perfect.
always answer my DMs.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. This has been great. Appreciate the time. I think that's the
Thanks
pop.
so much, Adam.